Oda is pretty unorthodox in the way he informs us readers. He scatters tidbits of information which when collected and pieced together produces a picturesque and deep understanding of the concept allayed. Understanding through syllogism rather than being spoon-fed the complete briefing, this forms a greater interactive experience between both reader and the story, which makes this story enthralling as it allows the reader to unearth a deeper level of comprehension. Complementing this subtle and vulpine delivery of information, he employs hyperbolic visuals to accompany his brief explanations. It allows the reader to form an in-depth understanding. In the case of hockey, this is achieved by pitting significantly inferior opponent against vastly superior opponents, leaving us with a sharp contrast. Juxtaposition gives richness to understanding. Rallies, and others alike, outbursts of King's hockey usually results in loss of consciousness. It's then easy to conclude that King's hockey's purpose is to fundamentally to induce unconsciousness. We lose the nuance of visuals if not paired with reference to their description as context, which results in things being lost in translation, so to speak. Observation hockey, Rayleigh displays his evasive prowess against the elephant. Sandersonia Hadian character easily weaves her way past this flurry of blows. If we allow visuals to take precedence without the reference to given definitions as a form of context, we may assume observation hockey is the ability to evade attacks. Against a revved-up Luffy, this ability is seemingly non-existent. When we take the definition of observation hockey, the ability to foresee voluntary actions 257, as basis for interpreting visuals, we ascertain that evasion is not the result of this power, but a possibility from being able to foresee premeditated actions. Achieving evasion depends on relative speed, reaction and circumstance. The fundamental basis of this power is simply to foresee future actions. Armament hockey, Sentomaru deflects Luffy's attack. Similarly, Marigold's hockey deflects Luffy's attack. If we only rely on the visual aids alone, we might come to the erroneous conclusion of armament hockey being the power to deflect attacks. Armament hockey here doesn't result in any deflections here. However, when we apply visual aids and descriptions as basis for our understanding, then we see it's fundamentally the power to make things harder as opposed to deflecting attacks, which is just an exaggerated imagery device to drive the point of armament hockey being hard. 597. To simplify my point, visuals and definitions are a dichotomy. All visuals need be interpreted in tandem with definitions. We're told that the Pirate King will be decided by those possessing King's hockey, which implies that it is a fearsome power. 717. The embellishment accredited seems undeserving, as King's hockey appears to be a mere fodder-knocking tool given that it's the most prominent and conspicuous visual accompanying it, and this has led to the general consensus that it is just aesthetically ostentatious and in utility a rather dull, anticlimactic and superfluous power. Antithetically to this popular notion, we're goaded towards a different paradigm, or pushed towards it, by Rayleigh sincerely expressing and warning Luffy that King's hockey must not be used until it can be controlled. Why? We'll soon find out. Nonetheless, one can't help but feel there is more to it besides knocking out fodder, as it's been exercised against beyond exceptional foes. 782. What is Supreme King's hockey? First, I think one should contemplate on who a king is in general. A king is an figurehead who exercises unconditional power over his subject. Reverence and awe reverberate off the king. Most importantly, this air of superiority worn by the king demands the unbridled fear and reverence of his subjects regardless of loyalty or the lack thereof. Perhaps, we'll see if there's a relation between this definition, this concept, and that of King's hockey. The manga explains it as the power to intimidate, and the potency of this power is measured by the user's spirit. 597. This definition provokes questions. What does unconsciousness have to do with intimidation? Wouldn't it be better to describe this as the power to induce unconsciousness? It does come across that way. How else can this phenomenon be construed? Robin gives us the answer: one can be intimidated to such a degree that they fall unconscious. 495. It's comparable to someone who loses consciousness to a phobia such as needle phobia, trypanophobia. If one notices in the top left Damalo black panel, he says he felt shivers, which denotes fear. This soporific effect or lull into unconsciousness seems to mask the nuanced distinction that this is a consequence of intimidation. Note, other translations describe King's hockey as the power to overwhelm, or overpower the will of the opponent. Will can be defined as determination, and the method by which determination can be weakened, overpowered or overwhelmed is through fear, which makes intimidation the most apt definition. I think it's also important to note that an unconscious person cannot feel intimidation. Perhaps this is a defense mechanism to avoid such powerful feelings. It requires being conscious to evidently express intimidation or fear and to acutely discern it, e.g., one knowing their lines, but forgetting them out of stage fright. Inherently, it's a psychological power. This begs the question that what effect does fear have in the heat of battle? With King's Haki explained, there is emphatic reference regarding the implications of intimidation which I believe complements this piece. Zeph succinctly condenses the consequences of feeling intimidated, lacking determination or conviction. Intimidation is the gateway to defeat or death in Battle 65. Rayleigh's remark coincides with Zeph's via his adding that the act of not doubting is strength, which in reverse can be interpreted as the act of doubting is weakness. 597. There are 2 degrees in which people will react as a result of being intimidated by Supreme King's Haki. Against the weak-spirited, King's Haki will intimidate so much that the opponent will lose unconsciousness, which are Robin's exact words. 495. Against the strong-spirited, though they may carry on fighting, their fighting with fear handicapping or suppressing their determination to win, fight or even fight back at all. 1. As a corollary to Zeph and Rayleigh's allusion to the implications of fear, and more so on those strong enough to remain conscious regardless of the overwhelming influence it bears upon those subject to it, it is beneficial to see exactly what fear can do in general, which I believe is something of a teaser as to what to expect when King's Haki becomes a much more resorted to power. Zoro cuts Monet with a small slash which alerts her to the reality that Zoro has no qualms fighting women as wrongly assumed. He could decide to kill her on a whim, as predators are naturally prone to. This frightening realization to his capricious nature is enough to pit her into a state of macabre. He then feigns an attack which Monet presumes would be accompanied with Haki. Fear disrupts her ability to fight and she ends up losing control of her abilities, composure and ultimately, her ability to even fight properly. Her defeat at that moment was concluded. 687. This is superb and well-orchestrated kidology and contrivance. King's Haki ability to intimidate isn't orchestrated but supernaturally enforced and unavoidable. While it may not have unwrithing in fear to such extent, it will cap one's ability to fight ultimately. This is what makes it such a highly regarded power. The effect goes without saying, it emulates the reverential and intimidating disposition that a ruling king possesses over his subjects, whether they truly deserve it or not. King's Haki is only a fearsome power if it can't be resisted. Every being that have been exposed to King's Haki have always pulled the disconcerted expression which implies intimidation or uneasiness at the very least. When 2 King's Haki users clash, it's in my opinion reminiscent of 2 people, or forces, pushing each other. If you're pushed and don't push back, you will fall back. In the case of kings, one will be intimidated. The clashes we're acquainted with have been equally matched, therefore, there's no outcome from the clash. With the premise put forth, I am of the belief that whomever is exposed will be inevitably intimidated regardless of their strength. The only role strength of will has against King's Haki is staying conscious, but lest we forget that we mostly express intimidation while conscious. The Gorgon sisters have unequivocally established that they were superior to Luffy before he used King's Haki or Gear Second. At this point, they're unaware he has a trick up his sleeve, so they're quite confident in their ability to manhandle him. Isn't it odd that despite proving and showcasing their superiority, that they suddenly deem him a threat? 520 after his brief outburst of King's Haki. Bear in mind they have no idea of Gear Second, his physical capacity is non-existent. This indicates that fear is truly a powerful weapon to impose in battle as iterated, and note that they do state, nothing to be afraid of because they were initially afraid, but only after affirming that he can't control his King's Haki. I think it bears pointing out to the significance of their taking orders from Luffy, a male, without even consulting the Empress Boa Hancock. It again hints at how fearful they must have been from the outburst. Shanks stepped into Marineford with King's Haki. Kobe was about to meet obliteration by Akainu and was resolved to die. Shanks intimidated Kobe into unconsciousness out of mercy for his valor. On the other hand, Akainu's expression reveals the distressed look, implying he was intimidated. 570. This expression is common even amongst animals who have been intimidated by it. King's Haki is only used sparingly as far as we've seen in the manga. Most likely because it can't be used very often? and probably depends on the level at which the user possesses it. Rayleigh suggests he could use it more than once, but doesn't do so as not to draw any attention towards himself, which suggests an increase in one's capacity will increase ability to use it with less constraints. 504. King's Haki based on what's been shown intimidates people to various degrees. As Zoro showcased, inducing fear can weaken one's ability to fight properly, and the implications that shoot off from that premise are rather vast. A small observation is King's Haki when used lets out a burst of high-pressure wind. The wind is indicative of the strength of the Haki in my opinion. Every instance Conqueror's Haki is used, the high wind pressure is present. Luffy vs Joker, Luffy vs Chinjiao, Luffy at Marineford, Luffy vs 50,000 with wind raising dust into the air, Luffy and Wano. This is why when Shanks used King's Haki on Whitebeard's ship, the wind pressure was so strong that it dented the Moby Dick. The dent wasn't the intention, but was there to indicate how strong his King's Haki was, which is why Whitebeard stated he was using it at its fullest intensity. 434. There's another analysis in this, but we'll release that on a later date.